Resuming debate, and by video conference, the Honourable Member for Fredericton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to acknowledge the land on which I speak today in Fredericton, which is Wolastoq territory, unceded, unsurrendered land operating under the peace and friendship treaties. We cannot just say these words, but we must have intention and action behind them. And I implore each member of this House to do just that. It is an honor to have the opportunity to speak to Bill C-5, and I wish to thank my Conservative colleague for sharing his time with me today. The issue of meaningful reconciliation is an issue that is important to my constituents, to people across this country, and it's particularly close to my heart for many, many reasons. First, as a mom of Indigenous children, my boys are Wolastoq. They are being raised with an appreciation for their identity, their language, and culture. My oldest son is in grade 3 in a public school that has made incredible efforts to not only include Indigenous knowledge, history, and culture, but to truly celebrate it. It is front and center at every school assembly, event, and in daily routines. There are integrated educational opportunities for all children, and there are unique learning opportunities for Indigenous youth through permanent staff employed by our local First Nation community who work at the school every day in innovative and exciting ways. My youngest son is 3 years old and attends an on-reserve Head Start program at the Willamogadug Early Learning Center. He receives instruction from his family members and some of our close friends. He is surrounded with love and care and dedication to culturally responsive education. Incidentally, his first day of school was on Orange Shirt Day last year. I couldn't help but think of the beauty of coming first full circle like that, the symbolic significance that his education will begin and proceed so differently than for so many of his ancestors. My oldest child looks more like me, with Celtic roots and light skin, although he is proud to be Indigenous. My youngest looks more like my husband, with dark skin and dark eyes. My prayer for him is always that he will not grow to experience racism and discrimination because of who he is. I pray that he will not feel like he does not belong or that he is not represented in the curriculum he learns throughout his educational journey, as my husband has felt. Another reason C5 is so important to me is because of my passion for teaching. My work in the public school system in New Brunswick was on behalf of First Nation communities. I worked to include accurate history and improve access to language and cultural experiences for Indigenous students, as well as advocate for institutional reforms for enhanced social justice equity in our provincial education system. I have seen the many ways our system continues to fail Indigenous students. I have also seen the incredible resilience of Indigenous students, and I have had the honor to witness inspiring growth, activism, and leadership. This generation of youth are ready to tackle our biggest challenges and to lead Canada into a brighter future as the fastest growing demographic. The 7 generations concept comes to mind and reinforces the idea that we bring with us the lessons and experiences of our ancestors, and that both trauma and healing pass through the bloodline to the present day. That the decisions we make today should result in a sustainable, equitable world 7 generations into the future. This brings me to our responsibility as Canadians. Orange Shirt Day in an educational context is an opportunity to learn, to honor, and to acknowledge the calls to action, to create space for Indigenous elders and survivors to share their truth and feel our love and appreciation. Schools, businesses, and organizations across New Brunswick proudly wear orange and undertake events and activities. This takes the form of healing walks, school assemblies, language lessons, mini powwows, and other creative, informative expressions. I will say that I worry that Bill C-5, which makes this day a holiday, could have the consequence of losing some of the momentum that has been built around awareness, particularly in our schools. I also worry that the concession of this day being only for federal employees may have the consequence of losing the power of the intent of a national holiday. I will certainly do all I can to prevent this in my community, and I would like to see some extra assurances with dedicated investments around this bill. I'm also not convinced this bill represents a meaningful act of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, especially considering events that are transpiring around the country. It seems to me that this government makes a habit of selecting only the easiest calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, abandoning those that require genuine effort, abdicating responsibility for the hard work we must undertake. I remind this House that there's a long list of education and health outcomes that should be our focus, those that would have lasting impacts for positive change. The sorts of changes that would mean Indigenous women would not have to suffer as Joyce Etchekon did in her last moments of life. The sorts of changes that would mean Chantel Moore and Rodney Levi might still be with us today. So far, most of the change I'm seeing in Canada is a result of the efforts of Indigenous communities and individuals. This is not acceptable. Canada has the responsibility to make things right. Canada must make amends. Canada must have these difficult conversations and show leadership. Our success will be measured in the way we respond to Indigenous nations on an ongoing basis when questions of sovereignty arise, as they have in Nova Scotia in recent weeks. It will be measured in the way we embrace the collective and inherent rights of Indigenous peoples, the way we carry out our relationships with these nations, the way we embolden or chastise racist commentary from Canadians that do not yet understand these rights. I recognize that a national memorial holiday was included in the TRC and that I have committed to stand behind each calls to action. Therefore, I will certainly vote in favor of this bill. However, I hope the government understands its continuing responsibility to support educational initiatives and to fund events and activities around this national holiday. The work we do today in the House will have repercussions on the next 7 generations. It will be the foundation of a future where we understand the truth of our past and celebrate what we have built together. I implore Canadians to observe this holiday, to learn the true intention behind it, and take on the challenge of becoming allies and champions of reconciliation. I will end with this metaphor, sent to me by Eddie Charlie of the Cowichan Nation and a residential school survivor. He described the long-term intergenerational impacts of the trauma inflicted by residential schools as poison leached into a river, contaminating everything along the way. He says, "We've been contaminated by hate, pain, aggression, and until we clean up that river, we'll always be stuck in a really bad place. The process of cleaning up that river is underway. It is our job as parliamentarians, as Canadians, to roll up our sleeves and to get to work." Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Before we go to questions and comments, the chair has notice of intervention on a point of order that we were dealing with earlier this day. The honourable member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I unreservedly apologize for the gesture I made in question period today. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for Red Deer Lacombe for his response, and I think we accordingly can consider the matter closed. Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? L'honorable député de Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Et je remercie ma collègue de Fredericton pour son admirable discours qui m'en a appris beaucoup. En fait, j'ai été très content d'apprendre sur ces 2 enfants, ces 2 garçons, et je suis absolument convaincu que ces 2 petits bonhommes sont entre très bonnes mains en ce moment. Je pense qu'évidemment, on doit appuyer ce projet de loi-là qui venait du travail de mon ancienne collègue néo-démocrate, Georgina Jolibois, mais qu'on doit aller beaucoup plus loin, un peu comme elle le soulignait. Alors, 2 questions. Est-ce qu'elle pense qu'on devrait avoir la Déclaration des Nations unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones inscrite dans l'ensemble de la législation fédérale? Et est-ce que le gouvernement fédéral ne devrait pas arrêter de poursuivre devant les tribunaux le jugement du tribunal des droits de la personne sur les services sociaux pour les enfants autochtones?
The honourable member for Fredericton.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci à mon collègue pour cette question et pour ses commentaires à propos de mes enfants. Merci beaucoup. I absolutely believe that we need to enshrine the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples into our federal framework. And I certainly believe that children should not be in court defending their rights, especially when it comes to their social welfare. And I also wish to add to the record that Indigenous communities are more than well equipped to handle child and family services on their own behalf for their own children, and that we very much need to honor, again, that sovereignty, that self-governance and self-determination piece that I was mentioning in my speech. So I just want to congratulate First Nation communities across the country for the incredible work that they continue to do on behalf of their children. And I implore my colleagues in the House to continue to do our work to catch up to what they've been doing. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Speaker, the member brings up, I think, a valid point in regards to the national legislation and where it has its impact. And there is, hopefully, through the legislation, we will see other jurisdictions do likewise. And emphasizing the importance that, as it's been pointed out previously, it's not a day off, but rather it's an opportunity for us to be a better society by getting a better understanding as to why we're designating this date. And just to her comments on that.
The honourable member for Fredericton.
Well, I mean, I certainly think it's important to formally enshrine this as an official holiday in Canada. I just wonder what that means. So I think we need to have more conversation about what, again, the responsibility of Canadians and non-Indigenous Canadians to reconcile what we have done. And so I just, I think about National Indigenous Peoples Day and some of the things that we celebrate, a lot of the positive actions that come out of such a day. So I ask that more Canadians learn. So it's really about that educational opportunity for me. So it goes back to investments. It goes back to supports. If we're doing better in our education system, if we have more culturally responsive curriculum, that's just part of the provincial system in general, I think that will have a bigger impact than perhaps a national holiday. So again, I support this, but we must go much, much, much further.
Question commentaire. La députée d'Avignon-Lamétis Matin, Matpidia.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'ai beaucoup apprécié le discours de ma collègue. Je la remercie. Et c'est difficile pour des personnes comme moi qui n'ont pas du tout vécu ce que les personnes des communautés ont vécu, les atrocités qu'ils ont vécues. Mais ce qu'on peut faire, c'est se mettre dans leur peau et agir comme des alliés. Et c'est notre rôle de parlementaire de le faire dans nos propres localités, d'apporter des exemples de commémoration de cette journée-là, d'éducation aussi et de sensibilisation. Et ce genre de projet de loi-là, on voit apporte un certain consensus de la part de l'opposition et du gouvernement. Alors, je pense que tout le monde est enclin à aller vers la réconciliation. J'aimerais savoir ce qu'elle pense que le gouvernement devrait faire la prochaine étape pour aller vers la réconciliation, parce qu'il semble que les partis d'opposition sont très enclins à appuyer tout ce que le gouvernement fera pour aller vers la réconciliation avec les peuples autochtones.
Bravo. The honourable member for Fredericton.
Et merci encore, Monsieur le Président, et merci à mon collègue pour ces questions. There's a lot that we need to be doing as parliamentarians. I look to the other calls to action. I mentioned some of the outcomes in education and health. I highlighted some of the ways that we continue to fail in these areas. I also think about the comparisons that have been made with Remembrance Day and with what this holiday could be. So it's really about our next steps as members of parliament and how we choose to observe and promote awareness in our communities around this national holiday. But I'd like to see, again, more concrete investments and commitments in funding, because it's going to take a lot more than our words. It's going to take actions, and it's going to take funding. So I think that's a big step for sure. Thank you very much.